The alarm clock rang at exactly 5 in the morning, but Prince William was already awake. He had been lying in bed for the past hour, staring at the ceiling of his bedroom in Buckingham Palace. Today was the day he would become King of England. After years of preparation, after decades of waiting, the moment had finally arrived. William slowly got out of bed and walked to the large window overlooking the palace gardens. Even in the early morning darkness, he could see people already, gathering outside the gates. Some had been camping there for days, waiting for this historic moment. The sight of their dedication both amazed and humbled him. These people had traveled from all corners of the world just to witness his coronation. He thought about his father, King Charles, who had passed away peacefully in his sleep just 3 months ago. Charles had ruled for only 2 years after Queen Elizabeth's death, but those years had been filled with wisdom and grace. On his deathbed, Charles had held William's hand and whispered, "You are ready, my son. You have always been ready." Those words echoed in William's mind as he prepared for the biggest day of his life. Catherine was still sleeping peacefully beside him. She looked beautiful even in her sleep, her hair spread across the pillow like golden silk. William remembered the day they first met at university, how nervous he had been to talk to her. Now, she would become his queen, standing beside him as they took on the enormous responsibility of leading the nation. He gently kissed her forehead, careful not to wake her. She would need all the rest she could get for the long day ahead. Walking to his private bathroom, William caught sight of himself in the mirror. At 41 years old, he carried the weight of his royal duties with dignity. But today he looked older somehow. The responsibility of becoming king had aged him over the past few months. Gray streaks were beginning to show in his dark hair, and lines had formed around his eyes. But there was also something else in his reflection, a sense of purpose that had grown stronger each day. The shower felt good against his skin, washing away the anxiety and nervousness of the morning. As the warm water flowed over him, William allowed himself to think about his mother, Princess Diana. She had been gone for over 25 years now, but her memory remained as vivid as ever. He could still hear her voice, still remember her laugh, still feel her gentle touch when she tucked him into bed as a child. Diana had always told him that being royal was not about crowns and ceremonies. It was about serving people, about using his position to help those who needed it most. She had shown him this through her work with charities, her visits to hospitals, her dedication to helping the homeless and the sick. One day, William, she had said, "You will be king. But remember, a true king serves his people, not the other way around." After his shower, William wrapped himself in a soft robe and sat in his favorite armchair by the window.
Ow.
The palace staff had prepared everything for the day, but he wanted a few more minutes of quiet before the chaos began. He picked up a letter from his bedside table, one that his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had written to him before she died. She had asked that it be given to him on his coronation day. The letter was written in her careful handwriting, each word chosen with love and wisdom. She wrote about the challenges he would face as king, about the importance of staying true to his values, about the love she had for him and Catherine and their children. "The crown is heavy, my dear William," she wrote, "but you have strong shoulders and a good heart. Trust in yourself, trust in your family, and trust in the people of our great nation." Reading those words brought tears to his eyes. Elizabeth had been more than his grandmother. She had been his teacher, his guide, and his inspiration. She had ruled for 70 years with grace and dignity, never complaining about the burden of leadership. Now, it was his turn to carry on her legacy. A gentle knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Your Royal Highness," came the voice of his personal secretary. "The preparations are ready to begin." William took a deep breath and stood up. The private moment was over. From now until late tonight, every minute would be scheduled, every movement planned, every word carefully chosen. He walked to his dressing room, where his coronation outfit was waiting. The red velvet robe was magnificent, embroidered with gold, thread, and precious stones. It had been worn by kings for centuries, each adding their own chapter to its history. Today, William would add his own story to this ancient garment as he began to dress. William thought about his children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. They were still young, but they would be watching today, learning what it meant to be royal. He wanted them to see him as a father first, a king second. He wanted them to understand that titles and crowns were not what made a person important. What mattered was how you treated others, how you served your country, and how you stayed true to your values. The morning light was growing stronger now. It's casting long shadows across the palace walls. Soon the carriages would arrive, the crowds would grow larger, and the ceremony would begin. But for now, in these last quiet moments, William allowed himself to feel the full weight of what was about to happen. He was about to become King of England, following in the footsteps of his ancestors, carrying forward a tradition that stretched back over 1,000 years. Taking one last look in the mirror, William straightened his shoulders and lifted his chin. He was ready. The boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin, the young man who had served in the military, the father who loved his children, the husband who cherished his wife, all of these experiences had prepared him for this moment. Today, he would not just wear a crown. Today, he would become a king. Catherine woke up to the sound of soft voices in the hallway outside their bedroom. The palace staff was already busy preparing for the biggest day in British royal history. She turned to look at William, but his side of the bed was empty. Sheets were still warm, telling her he had not been gone long. She knew he would be struggling with his emotions today. Just as she was struggling with hers, she sat up in bed and looked around the room that had been their private sanctuary for the past few years. After today, everything would change. They would no longer be the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. They would be king and queen. The weight of that responsibility felt enormous. But Catherine had learned to carry heavy burdens with grace. Walking to the window, Catherine could see the crowds growing larger by the hour. Police officers were setting up barriers and television crews were positioning their cameras. The whole world would be watching today, analyzing every gesture, every expression, every moment. She had grown used to public attention over the years, but this was different. This was history being made. A gentle knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Your Royal Highness, may I come in?" Out. It was Maria, her personal dresser, who had been with the family for over 10 years. Catherine smiled and opened the door. Maria carried a tray with tea and toast, knowing that Catherine would need some strength for the long day ahead. "How are you feeling, Your Royal Highness?" Maria asked, as she set the tray on the small table by the window. Catherine appreciated Maria's care and concern. Over the years, the palace staff had become like family to her and William. They shared the joys and sorrows of royal life, always supporting them through difficult times. "I am nervous," Catherine admitted honestly, "but also excited. Today feels like a dream that has been waiting to come true." She sipped her tea slowly, enjoying the warmth and comfort it brought her. The Earl Grey tea was the same blend that Queen Elizabeth had enjoyed every morning for 70 years. It was a small tradition that connected Catherine to the long line of queens who had come before her as she ate her breakfast. Catherine thought about her own journey to this moment. She had been a commoner when she met William at university, never imagining that one day she would become Queen of England. Her parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, had raised her to be strong, independent, and kind. Those qualities had served her well in royal life, helping her navigate the challenges of public scrutiny and royal protocol. The children were already awake in the nursery down the hall. Catherine could hear their voices as their nanny helped them get ready for the ceremony. Prince George, now 15 years old, understood the significance of today. He would be watching his father become king, knowing that one day he would follow in those footsteps. Princess Charlotte, 13, was excited about wearing her special dress and seeing all the important people who would attend the ceremony. Prince Louis, 11, was mostly excited about the horses and carriages that would be part of the procession. Catherine finished her breakfast and began the process of getting ready. Her coronation gown was hanging in the dressing room, a masterpiece of British craftsmanship. The dress was made of ivory silk and covered with intricate embroidery that told the story of the Commonwealth nations. Tiny diamonds and pearls had been sewn into the fabric, creating patterns that sparkled in the light. The train was 6 feet long, requiring careful coordination to manage during the ceremony. As Maria helped her into the dress, Catherine thought about the other women who had worn coronation gowns before her. Queen Elizabeth's dress had been famous for its beauty and symbolism. Queen Mary's gown had been a symbol of strength during difficult times. Now Catherine's dress would become part of that history, representing hope and renewal for a new generation. The jewelry Catherine would wear today had been carefully chosen for its historical significance. The tiara belonged to Queen Elizabeth and had been worn by royal brides for generations. The earrings were a gift from Queen Mary, passed down through the family. The necklace had belonged to Princess Diana, a touching tribute to William's mother. On this special day, looking at herself in the mirror, Catherine barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The young university student who had fallen in love with a prince was gone, replaced by a poised and elegant queen. The transformation was both beautiful and overwhelming. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of the promise she had made. When she married William, she would support him, stand beside him, and serve their country with dignity and grace. A message arrived from William asking if she was ready to see the children before the ceremony began. Catherine smiled and nodded. To Maria, she wanted to spend a few minutes with George, Charlotte, and Louis before the official event started. They were the most important people in her life, and their love gave her strength to face any challenge. Walking down the hallway to the nursery, Catherine could hear the excitement in the children's voices. They were dressed in their finest clothes, looking like perfect little royals. When they saw her, their faces lit up with joy and pride.
"Mummy,
"You look like a real queen," Charlotte exclaimed, running to hug her carefully so as not to wrinkle the dress. George stood a little straighter, understanding that today marked a new chapter in their family's story. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, learning about duty and service from his parents and teachers. "I am proud of you and Papa," he said quietly. Showing maturity beyond his years, Louis was bouncing with excitement, asking 100 questions about the ceremony and the crown and the horses. His enthusiasm brought laughter to the room, reminding everyone that even on the most serious days, there was room for joy and celebration. As they spent these precious minutes together, Catherine realized that no matter what titles they held, or what crowns they wore, they would always be a family first. That thought gave her the confidence she needed to face the world and begin her reign as Queen of England. The golden carriage waited outside Buckingham Palace like a magnificent piece of living history. William stood at the palace entrance, taking his final look at the home he had known for so many years. The Diamond Jubilee state coach gleamed in, the morning sunlight, its crystal panels catching the light and throwing rainbows across the courtyard. This same carriage had carried his grandmother to her coronation 70 years ago, and now it would carry him to his destiny. Palace guards in their bright red uniforms stood at attention, their tall black hats perfectly straight. The horses stamped their feet gently, sensing the importance of the moment. These were not ordinary horses, but specially trained animals that had carried royalty for decades. Their coats had been brushed until they shone, and their harnesses were polished to perfection. William took Catherine's hand as they approached the carriage. She looked absolutely stunning in her coronation gown, every inch a queen. The ivory silk caught the light beautifully, and the diamonds in her tiara sparkled like stars. Together, they represented the future of the British monarchy, a partnership built on love, respect, and shared commitment to service. As they climbed into the carriage, William felt the weight of history settling around him. We da da at well why well we all why all why all why were I will why I The gold decorations told stories of Britain's past, each symbol representing different aspects of the nation's heritage. Today, he would add his own chapter to this incredible story. The carriage began to move slowly through the palace gates, and immediately the sound hit them like a wave. Thousands of people were cheering, clapping, and calling out their names. Union Jack flags waved from every direction, and camera flashes created a constant sparkle in the crowd. William waved back, his heart swelling with emotion at the sight of so many people who had come to share this moment. The procession moved down the Mall, the famous red road that led to Westminster Abbey. Every window along the route was filled with faces, and people had climbed trees and lampposts to get a better view. Children sat on their parents' shoulders, waving tiny flags and shouting with excitement. Elderly people in wheelchairs had been brought out to witness history, their eyes bright with tears of joy. William noticed a group of military veterans standing together, their medals catching the sunlight. These men and women had served their country with honor, and seeing them there made him think of his own military service. He had flown helicopters as a search and rescue pilot, saving lives and serving others. That experience had taught him the true meaning of duty and sacrifice. As the carriage continued its journey, William saw familiar faces in the crowd. There was Mrs. Johnson, his old teacher from primary school, holding a sign that read, "Well done, William." There was Tom, a young man he had met during a charity visit to a children's hospital. Tom had been fighting cancer then. Seeing him healthy and happy in the crowd brought tears to William's eyes. The noise from the crowd was incredible. People were singing "God Save the King," their voices joining together in a song that had been sung for centuries. Street musicians played along on their instruments, adding to the joyful chaos. Even the normally serious London police officers were smiling and waving to the crowd. Catherine squeezed William's hand and pointed to a section of the crowd, where a group of children from a local school were holding up letters that spelled out "Welcome, King William." The children were jumping up and down with excitement, their faces glowing with pure happiness. One little girl, probably only 5 years old, was crying with joy as she waved her flag. The carriage passed by Big Ben, the famous clock tower that had watched over London for generations. The bells were ringing out across the city, announcing to everyone that this was a day of celebration. The sound mixed with the cheering crowd and the clip-clop of the horses' hooves, creating a symphony of joy that filled the air. William thought about all the people who were watching this moment around the world. Television cameras were broadcasting the procession to millions of homes in every country. People in hospitals were watching from their beds. Soldiers serving overseas were gathered around television screens. Children in classrooms were learning about British history as it happened. As Westminster Abbey came into view, William felt his heart begin to race. The ancient building had stood for nearly 1,000 years, witnessing the coronations of 38 kings and queens. Inside those walls, he would take the oath that would make him king. He would promise to serve his people, to protect the church, and to uphold the laws of the land. The crowd around the Abbey was even thicker than along the Mall. People had been camping here for days, sleeping in tents and chairs just to be close to the historic moment. Security officers and police formed human barriers, but they too seemed caught up in the excitement of the day. Even the most serious officials were smiling and enjoying the atmosphere. Catherine looked at William and saw the determination in his eyes. This was the moment they had both been preparing for their entire adult lives. All the training, all the ceremonies, all the public appearances had led to this day. Soon, they would walk into Westminster Abbey as Duke and Duchess. They would walk out as King and Queen. The carriage began to slow as they approached the Abbey entrance. William could see the red carpet stretching up the steps, lined with flowers and guarded by soldiers in ceremonial uniform. World leaders and royal family members from around the globe were already inside, waiting to witness this historic moment. As the carriage came to a stop, William took one last look at the crowd. Their faces were full of hope, excitement, and love. These were his people now, and he would spend the rest of his life serving them. The door of the carriage opened, and William stepped out into his future as King of England. The moment King William and Queen Catherine stepped out of Westminster Abbey, the world erupted in celebration. The crowd that had been waiting patiently for hours exploded with joy, their cheers so loud that they could be heard for miles around London. Confetti fell from the sky like colorful snow, and church bells rang out across the entire city, each one announcing that Britain had a new king and queen. William felt different as he walked down the Abbey steps. The weight of the crown on his head was nothing compared to the weight of responsibility he now carried in his heart. He was no longer just a prince who would one day be king. He was the king, right now, in this moment. Every decision he made from this point forward would affect millions of people, not just in Britain, but around the world. The return journey to Buckingham Palace was even more spectacular than the trip to the Abbey. The same golden carriage that had carried him as a prince now carried him as a king. The horses seemed to step higher, as if they too understood the significance of what had just happened. The coachmen sat straighter, their uniforms even more perfect than before. As the carriage moved through the streets of London, William looked out at the faces in the crowd. There were people of all ages, from tiny babies in their parents' arms. 2 elderly grandparents who had witnessed the coronations of 3 different monarchs. Children were jumping up and down with excitement, their faces painted with the Union Jack. Teenagers were taking selfies and posting them on social media, sharing this historic moment with the world. What struck William most was how diverse the crowd was. People from every background, every religion, every corner of the Commonwealth had come together to celebrate this moment. There were traditional British families waving flags, but there were also families who had recently moved to Britain from other countries, all united in their excitement for their new king. Catherine squeezed William's hand as they waved to the crowd. She looked radiant in her coronation gown, the tiara sparkling in the afternoon sunlight. "Ah!" The people were calling out her name just as loudly as they called out his. They loved her for her grace, her kindness, and the way she had supported William. Through all the challenges of royal life, the carriage passed a group of school children who were holding up a banner that read, "Thank you, King William, for caring about us." The simple message hit William like a thunderbolt. These children represented the future of Britain, and he was now responsible for helping to create the world they would inherit. He waved specially to them, making sure they knew he had seen their message. "Daughter." As they approached Buckingham Palace, William could see that the crowds were even thicker than when they had left. The area in front of the palace was packed with people as far as the eye could see. Television crews from around the world were broadcasting live, sharing this moment with viewers in every country on earth. The palace balcony, where William would soon appear, was decorated with flowers and royal banners. Inside the palace, the royal family was gathering for the traditional balcony appearance. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were waiting in their finest clothes, excited to see their father as the new king. They had watched the ceremony on television, and now they would be part of the celebration that the whole world would see. The palace staff moved with practiced efficiency, helping William and Catherine prepare for their balcony appearance. The same people who had served them breakfast that morning were now serving their king and queen. The transformation was remarkable, but the warmth and care from the staff remained the same. William took a moment to look in the mirror before stepping onto the balcony. The man looking back at him was a king, but he was also still a husband, a father, and a son who missed his parents and grandmother. The crown on his head was magnificent, but it was the love in his heart that would guide him. As he ruled, Catherine adjusted her tiara one final time and took William's hand. Together, they walked toward the balcony doors, knowing that once they stepped outside, the world would be watching. The noise from the crowd was incredible, even from inside the palace. People were chanting "Long live the King" and singing the national anthem. The balcony doors opened, and William and Catherine stepped out into the sunshine. The roar from the crowd was deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the palace. Thousands of people stretched out before them, waving flags and cheering with pure joy. The sight was so overwhelming that both William and Catherine had tears in their eyes. Their children joined them on the balcony, and the crowd's excitement reached a new level. Prince George stood tall and proud next to his father, understanding that he was witnessing history. Princess Charlotte waved enthusiastically to the crowd, her smile lighting up her face. Prince Louis looked a bit overwhelmed by all the noise and excitement, but he waved bravely along with his family as the royal family stood together on the balcony. William felt a sense of completeness that he had never experienced before. This was his family, his people, his country, and his responsibility. The journey that had begun when he was born had led to this moment, and he was ready to embrace everything that lay ahead. The crowd continued to cheer, and William knew that this was just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, and new opportunities to serve his people. But for now, in this perfect moment, he was simply a king standing with his family, surrounded by the love and support of his nation. The sun was beginning to set over London, casting a golden glow across the city. It had been the most important day in British history for decades, and William knew that people would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. He had become King William, and his reign had officially begun. As the evening shadows grew longer across Buckingham Palace, King William finally found himself alone in his private study. The crown had been carefully placed on its special stand, and he had changed from his ceremonial robes into a simple dark suit. The transformation from the magnificent king of the morning to the quiet man of the evening was remarkable. But the weight of what had happened remained with him. The study was filled with congratulatory messages from around the world. Presidents, prime ministers, and ordinary citizens had all sent their best wishes for his reign. William picked up a letter from a young girl in Australia who had drawn a picture of him wearing his crown, with the words "Thank you for being our king" written in colorful crayon. These personal messages meant more to him than all the formal congratulations from world leaders. Catherine entered the room quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. She had also changed from her coronation gown into comfortable clothes, but she still looked every inch a queen. The tiara was gone, replaced by her natural beauty and the warm smile that had captured William's heart all those years ago at university. They sat together on the sofa, just as they had done countless times before, but everything felt different. "Now how does it feel to be king?" Catherine asked softly, handing him his tea. It was the same Earl Grey blend they had enjoyed that morning, but somehow it tasted different now. Everything in their lives had changed in the space of a single day, and they were both still trying to understand what it all meant. William thought about her question for a long moment. "It feels like coming home," he said finally. "Like everything I have done in my life has been leading to this moment. But it also feels terrifying, knowing that so many people are depending on me to make the right decisions." He paused and looked out the window at the crowds that were still celebrating in the streets below. The children had finally gone to bed after an evening filled with excitement and celebration. Prince George had stayed up later than usual, asking questions about what it meant now that his father was king. Princess Charlotte had fallen asleep clutching a small Union Jack flag that someone in the crowd had given her. Prince Louis had been overwhelmed by all the attention and was happy to return to the comfort of his own bedroom as William and Catherine talked quietly in the study. Palace staff were already beginning to prepare for the changes that would come with the new reign. Schedules needed to be adjusted, security arrangements reviewed, and protocols updated. The transition from prince to king involved thousands of small details that most people never thought about. William's phone buzzed with a text message from his brother, Prince Harry, who was watching the ceremony from his home in California. "Congratulations, Your Majesty," the message read. "Mom and Dad would be so proud of you today. You looked every inch a king." The simple words from his brother brought tears to William's eyes, reminding him of the family bonds that remained strong despite the distance between them. The television in the corner of the study was showing highlights from the day's events. William watched himself being crowned, still amazed that it had actually happened. The moment when the Archbishop placed the crown on his head looked even more magical on television than it had felt in person. The sunlight streaming through the Abbey windows had created an almost heavenly atmosphere. The cameras had captured perfectly. News reports were already analyzing every moment of the coronation, from Catherine's dress to the music chosen for the ceremony. Experts were discussing what William's reign might bring, what changes he might make, and how he would lead Britain into the future. But sitting in his study with his wife, William was not thinking about politics or policies. He was thinking about the promises he had made and how he would keep them. One of the most moving moments of the day had come when William signed the official documents that made him
king.
using the same pen that his father and grandmother had used before him. He wrote his signature as William R. for the first time. The R stood for Rex, the Latin word for king, and seeing it on paper made his new role feel completely real. As the night grew later, William and Catherine walked through the palace corridors that had been their home for years, but would now be their kingdom's heart. The same paintings hung on the walls, the same carpets covered the floors, but everything felt different now that they were king and queen. They were no longer just living in the palace. They were responsible for everything it represented. Standing at the window of their bedroom, William looked out at London, spread below them. Millions of people were going to sleep tonight knowing they had a new king, trusting him to protect their country and serve their interests. In hospitals, doctors and nurses were caring for patients while thinking about the new reign. In schools, teachers were preparing lessons about this historic day. In homes across the nation, families were talking about what they hoped the new king would accomplish. William thought about his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, who had reigned for 70 years with such grace and dignity. She had shown him that being a monarch was not about power or privilege, but about service and sacrifice. Every day of her reign, she had put the needs of her people before her own desires. Now it was his turn to follow her example. As he prepared for bed, William realized that tomorrow would be his first full day as king. There would be meetings to attend, decisions to make, and people to meet. The work of being king never stopped, just as his grandmother had taught him. But he was ready for the challenge, supported by Catherine's love and guided by the values his parents had instilled in him. The coronation was over, but King William's reign had just begun. As he fell asleep that night, the crown safely stored nearby, he dreamed of the Britain he hoped to help create, a nation where everyone had the opportunity to succeed, where kindness mattered more than status, and where the future was brighter than the past. The ancient doors of Westminster Abbey opened before William like gates to another world. The sound of the crowd outside faded as he stepped into the sacred space that had witnessed over 1,000 years of British history. The Abbey was filled with the soft glow of countless candles, their light dancing across the stone walls and creating shadows that seemed to whisper stories of all the kings and queens who had walked this same path before him. 2,000 guests had gathered inside the Abbey, representing every corner of the Commonwealth and beyond. World leaders sat beside charity workers, famous celebrities next to ordinary citizens who had made extraordinary contributions to their communities. The mixing of different people from all walks of life was exactly what William had wanted for his coronation. This was not just a ceremony for the wealthy and powerful, but a celebration that included everyone who made Britain great. William walked slowly down the long aisle, his red coronation robe flowing behind him like a river of velvet. Every step echoed in the vast space, and he could feel the eyes of history watching him. The stained glass windows cast colorful patterns on the floor, telling biblical stories that had inspired British monarchs for centuries. Angels carved in stone looked down from the ceiling, their faces peaceful and welcoming. Catherine walked beside him, her own coronation gown catching the candlelight beautifully. She carried herself with such grace and dignity that she looked like she had been born to be a queen. The diamond tiara on her head had been worn by Queen Elizabeth on her wedding day, connecting Catherine to the long line of royal women who had served the nation with honor. As they approached the altar, William saw familiar faces among the guests. His uncle Prince Edward was there with his family, smiling proudly. His cousins Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie waved discreetly from their seats. Even some of his old friends from university had been invited. A reminder of the normal life he had once lived before duty called him to the throne. The choir began to sing an ancient hymn, their voices rising to fill every corner of the Abbey. The music was so beautiful that many guests wiped tears from their eyes. William recognized the hymn as one that his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had loved, and hearing it now made him feel her presence in the sacred space. He knew she would be proud of this moment, proud of how far he had come. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood waiting at the altar, wearing the same ceremonial robes that had been used for coronations for hundreds of years. He was a kind man who had spent time with William over the past months, helping him prepare for this sacred moment. The Archbishop understood that becoming king was not just about wearing a crown, but about making a promise to God and to the people to serve with wisdom and humility. As William knelt before the altar, he could see the imperial state crown waiting. On a special cushion, the crown contained some of the most precious gems in the world, including the Black Prince's ruby and the Cullinan II diamond. But William knew that the real power of the crown was not in its jewels, but in what it represented. It was a symbol of service, of duty, and of the sacred trust between a monarch and the people. The ceremony began with prayers that had been spoken at every coronation since the Norman conquest. The words were in both English and Latin, connecting the present moment to centuries of tradition. William listened carefully to each prayer, understanding that this was not just a ceremony, but a sacred ritual that would bind him to his role as king for the rest of his life. When the time came for the anointing, William removed his outer robe and sat in the ancient coronation chair. This chair had been carved from oak over 700 years ago and had been used by every British monarch since. Edward II, as he sat in the same seat where his ancestors had been crowned, William felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. The Archbishop used holy oil to anoint William's hands, chest, and head. This oil had been specially prepared according to a secret recipe that had been passed down through generations. The anointing was the most sacred part of the ceremony, marking William as chosen by God to lead the nation. As the oil touched his skin, William felt a sense of peace and purpose wash over him. The moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The Archbishop lifted the imperial state crown high above his head, and the entire abbey fell silent. Even the children stopped, fidgeting, sensing the importance of what was about to happen. William closed his eyes and thought of his mother Diana, his father Charles, and his grandmother Elizabeth. He promised them silently that he would honor their memory by being the best king he could be. As the crown was placed on his head, something magical happened. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds outside. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, filling the abbey with rainbow colors. The light seemed to dance around William, creating an almost supernatural atmosphere that took everyone's breath away. The guests erupted in applause, but William barely heard them. He was overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment, tears streaming down his face as he realized that he was now truly King of England. The crown felt heavy on his head, but it was a weight he was ready to carry. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. Now it was finally here. Catherine was crowned queen immediately after. Her own ceremony filled with the same sense of sacred duty and joyful celebration. As she knelt before the altar, William watched with pride and love, knowing that he could not imagine a better partner to share the throne with. Together, they would lead Britain into a new era of hope and service. The Archbishop proclaimed them King William and Queen Catherine, and the Abbey bells began to ring out across London, announcing to the world that Britain had a new monarch. The sound of the bells mixed with the cheers of the crowd outside, creating a symphony of joy that would be remembered for generations to come.